Somewhere along the way, you started to think your life was going to follow a plan. You work for it, you map it out, you believe it, and then something happens, and you realize you were never really in control to begin with.
When I was 28, I had a vision of what my life was going to be. I'd mapped this out. One of my goals was to be a director of an R&D organization.
Welcome to the Grandpa Channel. I'm Steve Harris, but my grandkids call me Rivers. Here we ask a simple question. What did life teach you the hard way? Because a lifetime reveals things you can't learn any other way. So pull up a chair, because what a lifetime reveals can steady another. This is my brother-in-law, Jeff Taylor.
All of a sudden, I found myself, I was sitting in my office, 50 scientists working for me with the title of Director of R&D. And I remember sitting there with this epiphany. You've done what you're supposed to do. Now what?
Yeah.
Soon thereafter, the 2008 Great Recession hit. My company came to me and said, we don't need you. And I found myself having to look for a job. What happened out of that process, I started to do what's called innovation. And I found that I had a gift for taking technology and turn it into business models that could bring value. So by going through, to some degree, fear, the confusion, the complexities of all of a sudden having to go through the process to redefine myself during the middle of a recession, I found a brand new career called innovation. And over the next 25 years, a whole new vision opened up that I could have never dreamed for myself. I look back on that, I never had control of my life. If I would have handed it over to God earlier, who knows where things would have gone. But he would take you places that we can't think about going, because he knows better. He's omniscient. He's got it. And so all of a sudden I realized, if I just back off and let him take control, we're going to see some very interesting things happen with our life.
What did life teach you the hard way?
I grew up in a family that lived outside more than we lived inside. And our front room was the top of a mountain, a ski resort, around a bonfire, and life was always some sort of a wild adventure. So reality is, I came from a family that I had a lot of randomness and uncertainty. In 1983, when I got home from my mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, all I wanted to do was ski and get back in school. And so I was up skiing, and one day, and I got to know this young lady. And the first couple hours, she had no interest in me whatsoever. She takes a fall, and the next thing you know, we're getting to know each other. And here's this adventurous young lady. And it didn't take long before I realized that her family was very opposite from my family. Her family was very organized. Her family, their front room was actually the front room. Things were in control. In fact, everything's planned, and her mother made a career of it, which was absolutely wonderful. And the other scientific element is what we call enthalpy, which is structure and order. And all of a sudden, those came together. I started to recognize that the randomness drives change, and the structure drives consistency. And what's interesting is bringing those two concepts together, all of a sudden drive a balance instead of one being good, one being bad. The randomness, the chaos, the adversity, the challenges, all those come in to throw our lives into some sort of a hiccup, into some sort of a chaotic situation. But the reality is that structure that comes involved is how we harness it, and we move it into something progressive. How do hard things turn into something important? I'll give you two examples of that. One is when I got done with the University of Utah, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with my life. I just had a degree in material science and engineering. I thought I needed to go to grad school. I applied to 3 or 4 different universities and got turned down across the board. One university, a professor called me early in the summer and said, come work for me at the University of Florida. We'll give you a degree. We didn't have anything else, so Rebecca and I picked up our stuff, put a small U-Haul together, and drove across country to Florida and started a master's degree at the University of Florida. What I soon found later was the culture and the demands of that 2-year degree were going to be much greater. If I would have known going in, I probably would have not gone. When I got there, I'd been there about 3 weeks, and my advisor called me into his office. And he handed me a paper, and he said, this paper has just been accepted by a journal. You're going to go down and do all the work, and we're going to publish the paper. And as I looked at the paper, I realized he had made some conclusions without the work truly being done. And the submission date was 3 months.
Wow.
And so I said, I can't do this. I won't do it. And he said, you will do it. I went back the next day, and I made the deal with him. I said, I will do everything I can possibly do to get this paper written, but I need the ability at the end to be able to make the conclusions in the paper as the data would dictate, not what we think. And so he agreed. Here's the challenge. It was a chemical reaction that took 8 hours to run. If I started calculating how long that took to get the 3 months done, I was going to have to run that reaction 24 hours a day for 6 days a week in order to get this done enough to get that thing published. So I would show up in the laboratory at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd put that reaction on. I'd work most of the day trying to put things together. 5 o'clock, I'd analyze that information, put another reaction on, go home, spend time with Rebecca and Lauren, our first daughter, put her to bed. I'd go back to work in the evening, take the reaction off, put another one on, do that until 2 o'clock in the morning, go home, catch 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And I do that Monday through Friday, run a couple of reactions on Saturday. And I did that for 3 months. I was exhausted. I was miserable. Got the paper done. The paper was actually relatively good. I was very proud of it at that point, but the workload never stopped. At the end of a year, my advisor offered to have me do it with them, and I said, absolutely not. But those papers were the ones that got me into the universities to do my graduate work that I really needed to do. I thought that that was a miserable mistake. And what's interesting to me over the course of my next 3 decades of scientific endeavors, I draw on those 2 years at the University of Florida probably as much as anything else.
Yeah.
Scientifically, yes. How to deal with difficult people constantly. How to be able to get down and work hard. How to put structure around to be able to take something that was completely chaotic and turn it into forward progress. And I've used it over and over and over in my life.
Now, just out of curiosity, were the conclusions that he had come to without doing all of this testing, did you end up agreeing with him at the...
It's a great question. The answer is he was close. He was close.
Okay. Right.
Not close enough.
Yeah.
But yet the data showed some things that we had not anticipated bringing forward. So it became a very interesting foundation. But I could have let it go. I could quit. I could have let that chaos take over at that point. If it wasn't for Rebecca giving me support, my mother was on the phone with me a little bit. And we were saying, look, you got 3 months, handle this. If I would have not put that structure, that net around, it would have been lost energy that would have led to nothing. But yet buckling down and doing what needed to be done generated a foundation for a 30-year career. And it's interesting. Right now, I'm in a startup company, and that startup company's technology, 35 years later, is very similar to what I was studying at the University of Florida. And actually asking some of the very same questions. So it's come circled all the way back.
Wow. Would you have ever thought that would have been the case?
I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could get out of there. There's no question in my life that my life has been led by greater powers. I didn't have the foresight at what was 25, 26 years old to be able to see that that was actually going to happen.
I have found at the tender age of 70 that I see the hand of God throughout my life, which thing I did not know at the time. Like when I was 30, you didn't see a heck of a lot of life. And I think that's been one of the few compensating factors for getting older is that I can see things more clearly and I can connect the dot. Would you agree or disagree with that in your life?
I agree. I agree with you. What I've learned over the course of time through the School of Hard Knocks, and also having a spiritual basis that I can look at life in a slightly broader perspective than what my physical and mortal eyes would allow me to do. That faith always looks forward. And when we're moving forward, moving with faith with the best decisions we can make. Knowledge has hindsight. And so it's when we flip around and turn around, all of a sudden we start to recognize that what we'd gone through leads to the learning, the miracles, and the advancements and the progressions. But it's usually only when we look back on it that we gain that knowledge associated with it. And that's true for life. It's true for a religious endeavor and trying to understand where you should be spiritually. It's true as we look at our family and social relationships, that the real knowledge of what's happening comes when we turn around and take a look in the rearview mirror.
Do you feel an obligation to share this knowledge, especially with kids, grandkids, and family members and friends?
In fact, as a father and as a grandfather, one of the critical aspects is how do we actually send that through? As a leader in a corporate world, having hired many, many, many different young scientists into my organizations, finding out that some of them came from fantastic schools and knew their scientific principles perfectly, but yet we're still somewhat naive on how to navigate through the difficulties of life.
Right.
It's absolutely essential to be able to take that knowledge and turn it around. Steve, how I've done that in a lot of cases is I've written them up. And so in the corporate world, I created a manuscript that never got published, but it's a manuscript that goes through essentially what I just talked about. I call it the Delta cycle, and it's really defined as the science of accomplishment. How do you get things done?
Yeah.
And that has been used with many people that have worked for me. My children have, and grandchildren as well. Now that they're starting to get old enough, it's very similar to basically taping or recording your life history. But in many ways, I find doing it on paper works really well for me.
Oh, that's wonderful. I feel like I could do a better job of teaching my kids some of the lessons of life that I've learned. All of the hard lessons I've learned in life came from hard things that I had to go through. Nothing came that I can even think about came from some sheer luck or a gift out of nowhere. When in your life do you feel the most alive?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I will give you two circumstances which seem to fit perfectly for my life. One is when I'm with my family, there is something powerful about that event. The other aspect of it is I was raised in the outdoors. I probably had ski boots on before I had regular shoes on. I absolutely love the outdoors, and I've often wondered why so much. And it's something interesting about being in the outdoors, and your senses are so keen. All of a sudden, it's just you and nature. As I have my family out on backpacking trips, and many of my children and children-in-law now actually run trails with me at this point. And when I get them out on the trails, there's something very magical about it. When I'm hiking with Rebecca or we're kayaking, there's something about bringing the concept of nature together with that bond and structure of family. And it just awakens my senses. And somebody asked once, I'm an ultra runner and endurance athlete, and I've spent hours and hours and hours, sometimes alone. And besides the question of how would you run 100 miles, I'd get tired driving 100 miles. But the other question is, well, what do you think about while you're out on those trails so much alone for so many hours? And it's interesting. And I was just on the trails yesterday thinking about that same question. And my mind is so clear that sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's a complete awareness of my own body as I'm actually being athletic. How do I feel? How's my nutrition? But a lot of times my mind is so aware that much of what I learn and think about scientifically comes from those runs.
Wow.
Sometimes I struggle through family issues. It's amazing how aware my mind becomes as you combine family company, physical exertion, and the outdoors. And I just think it's absolutely a wonderful time.
It sounds like that kind of a holy trifecta when you think about those three elements coming into play. It's wonderful.
It is. And, there's times it almost feels like a prayer, and then there's other times it feels very difficult. But once again, we're starting to see a theme here. I'm not afraid to go into those difficult times because they lead to so much benefit.
Now, putting all your false modesty aside, and by the way, I consider you to be a very humble person. What are some superpowers that you have that kind of surprise you a little bit?
I am a deep-rooted introvert. It's interesting. And early in my years, not quite understanding what that meant and the value of that, it became a disability. In fact, early in my career, it was to the point where it was introversion to almost shyness at times. But one of the advantages that I do have is the ability to quietly sit in a room without having to be the one in front and watch. That's been really interesting. If I keep my mouth shut...
That leads to your gift of innovation too, Jeff, doesn't it?
It is one of the reasons that I think I do well in the innovation world is because I start to listen and I start to watch, and I don't necessarily have to be the one to talk initially. It's become a real powerful tool in my arsenal, both professionally, socially, and also spiritually, because it's taught me more than I would have if I was just trying to lecture or trying to get people to be agreeing with me. Rebecca and I had some really interesting discussions that how charity is not about being right, but it's about loving and listening.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I love children so much. I love working with youth. I love children. It's so much fun because I love to get down on their level and listen to them. And guess what? Kids love to talk.
Yeah.
They love to tell you what's going on. And if you just quiet down, they'll tell you everything you need to know and then some, because you have no idea what's going to come out of their mouth. Youth will do the same thing. Adults will if you just open up and listen. So, it's interesting. At one point when I would have absolute fear of walking into a cocktail party at a conference and have to just dread spending the next hour having small talk. Today, I recognize that same power is the same power that allows me to look at the world in the way that I look.
Aren't parents to some degree, innovation directors for their family?
In the innovation world, what's interesting about innovation is that those who do innovation correctly become observationists. In other words, it's a matter of watching to see where the opportunities land, and we become opportunistic.
Mm-hmm.
And let me put it this way. We were looking for a new idea. I was working for Valspar. We were formulating paints, and I actually hired an innovation firm to go into a big box hardware store and watch people buy paint and supplies. Then they would go to their home and watch them paint and take notes. And then we'd bring them back together and we'd sit there and we'd watch. Here's what's interesting. There's two things you look for when you go through those processes. Number one are the workarounds that actually people do. They come to a problem in the problem, they think, I have a problem, and most people will come up with a solution. It may not be the most innovative solution, but they'll come up with some way to get around it. And if you can see what those are, you can actually build upon that, come up with the ideas that are necessary going forward. The other one is, what do they not have? And how do I supply them the tools in order to be able to accomplish the task that we want them to? As a parent, and particularly as a grandparent, what we need to be doing is watching our children go through the workarounds in their lives, because they won't tell you, but they'll show you where the problems are. And our job as a parent is not to solve the problems, but make sure they have the tools necessary for them to solve the problems, because that's when they become independent.
Yeah.
And the difficulty associated with that is, number one, learning to be observant, and number two, being patient enough to stay out and know when to step in their
Those are
lives.
hard things. Those are really hard things. Oh, I think that a lot of us want to make our kids' lives easier than we had it. And I'm not so sure that's a real great ticket for success.
I almost think we rob our children. If we do everything for them, we rob them of the experiences that we're having this conversation right now. The man I am today is because of the School of Hard Knocks and the challenges I went through. If somebody would have actually told me exactly how to navigate my life, I would not have the hindsight knowledge that I have today. If I do that for my children, I rob them of the same knowledge. And so it's not necessarily that I want my children to have a better life, but I don't want to rob my children from the experience in the School of Hard Knocks in order to get there, because they get taught more from those experiences than I could ever teach sitting down across the dinner table and trying to lecture to them.
I agree. What do you believe now that you once resisted or dismissed or felt certain about? And to introduce that, I would tell you that at the tender age of 70, I have a lot fewer answers and a lot more questions, but the answers that I have are rock solid. I mean, they're really good. Maybe it's been the opposite, that you're gaining all these great answers that dwarf what I have. And I'll go back to my house and go, geez, I wish I'd done it what Jeff did.
You've mentioned one that's actually really quite interesting. The journey you're taking and the journey I'm taking are very different. And as a youngster, I would say, well, I've got to be right. You need to take my journey, or I need to tell you how to take your journey. And as a parent, particularly as a young parent, I fell into that trap on a regular basis. Today, having gone through what I've done and realized how personal every one of my experiences is, watching my children who are now adults and have gone through different experiences, even though they came out of the same DNA, that each one of us have a journey that we need to take, and we need to take it independently, because there's certain things you need to know and certain things I need to know. We've all been given inherent skills, talents, and personalities. And the skill sets that you gain from the School of Hard Knocks versus the ones I gained from the School of Hard Knocks are very, very, very different. And so in some ways, what would I tell a 28-year-old? Relax. Let it unfold and take your own journey. And in today's world, we have a lot of experts, a lot of influencers, and a lot of information that's trying to tell us what to be and how to do it. And in some cases, we just need to back off and figure it out ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. Is there another superpower that jumps into your mind, that in part of the quiver of Jeff Taylor? besides the power to observe and to kind of assimilate things? Anything else jump into your mind?
Well, I can tell you one, and it's not necessarily so philosophical or anything else, but I learned very early in my life that I actually love endurance.
Really?
And have this ability to be able to endure things, not just spiritually and emotionally, but one of the reasons I fell in love with being an endurance athlete. When my brothers and I would go out hiking, young, testosterone-driven young men, we didn't hike very often. We ran.
Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, the concept of trail running wasn't really popular, but we were doing it. I was about 20 years old. I thought, I'm going to sign up for a 5K race.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And I was classic middle of the pack. If I wasn't fast, I tried a 10K, same kind of a deal. And I realized that, this is not for me. I love to run, but competing is not very fun. Mm-hmm. I got into grad school. I thought, I'm going to try a marathon. And when I did a marathon, it took 2 or 3 years to get to the point where I felt like I had enough training, jumped into a marathon, and I found myself so much better. Now I was in the middle of the pack.
Right.
And I realized, you know what? I'm not a competitive runner. When I started my career, I started at Eastman Kodak in Rochester, and there's a park across the street and right outside my office. So at lunch, I would turn around and just get my head clear. I'd go out, and there were 2 gentlemen, 10 to 20 years my senior, and we started to run at lunch quite a bit. And the one who claims he was a self-professed curmudgeon looked at me one day and said, "You're running the wrong race." Mm-hmm. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You are running way too short races. Stop doing marathons." And he introduced me to the concept of ultra running. I signed up for a 50-miler in upstate New York. 50 of us lined up on this event, and it took off, not having any idea what to do. Rebecca, trying to crew me through, had no idea what was going on, and it was a loop course, 3 loops. And the first loop I came back, she goes, "What do you need? I don't know what to do." When I went off on the next loop, came back the second time, and she's got, "Well, you need to do this, this, and this, and this," because she's talking to everybody else and gaining all this information. And I got to the third loop and started to really struggle, but all of a sudden, something kicked in. Come to short, 6th place on that event, worked out really well, and I realized that old curmudgeon was correct. I was running the wrong race. I am not fast, but I can run long. And in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, there's a mountain range. It's the farthest west mountain range of the Appalachians called the Laurel Mountains. Absolutely beautiful. But there's a 70-mile trail that goes from one end of that mountain along the ridge to the other. And there's an ultra run, a race that actually runs that, the Laurel Highlands 70-miler. I was training on those trails just for fun. I went up one year to crew at the mile 56 aid station. And I'm thinking, I could do this. Uh-huh. And so I signed up, and the next year I went. 2 weeks before the race, I was sick. I got the flu. It was terrible. I was ready to drop out. And 2 days before the race, it kind of subsided down. I went to the starting line, took off, and at mile 28, that flu had come back with a vengeance. And I was shaking. I was feverish. I was really struggling. I came into that aid station. Rebecca was there. I dropped all my gear, and I said, I'm done. I'd never quit a race. And so we got in the car, came home. I was sick for the next 3 weeks trying to get over that. I was devastated. I had quit. And so I went to the emotions of, was I not good enough? Mm-hmm. Was I weak? Did I give up? Should I have gone on? And I went through that whole process. And as the process developed and 3-4 months went by, it transferred and it changed. And all of a sudden I realized, you know what? It was something that had to happen. And over the course of the next 6 months, it became a real victory. Why? I started running, not chasing perfection, but chasing good.
Yeah.
I no longer had to worry about whether I had to be perfect on the trail and not quit. So I could actually push harder than I thought I was going to push, and a DNF didn't kill me. Mm-hmm. And the next year, I signed up for that same race and podiumed as a 2nd place on that one. But one of the reasons I think I was so successful on that race is I ran free and not worrying about whether I was going to be perfect or not. And there were points in that race that were very difficult, but it didn't matter at that point. I was now free of the burden of perfection, and I was able to move forward.
It's strange how the things we would never choose us, and they end up giving us something we couldn't have found any other way. Not in the moment, usually not even close to the moment, but somewhere down the road, you start to see what was really going on. You start to connect the dots. And then it's easier to see the hand of God in your life. That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. If something you heard made you laugh, pause, or see life a little differently, pass it along. We're gathering the lessons people learned the hard way, the stories, the second thoughts, and the wisdom that only comes with time. And we'd love to hear yours. What did life teach you the hard way? Until next time, keep the perspective honest and the stories coming. I'm Rivers, and I'm out of here.